Three German MG-42 machine guns had an American platoon frozen in open snow. No cover, no retreat. Artillery already zeroing in to wipe them out. One man stood up. His name was Technical Sergeant Russell Dunham, 24 years old, already wounded, staring up a 40-degree hillside designed to kill anyone who moved. 11 men had already died here. Dunham knew if he stayed down, every man behind him would be dead within the hour. So he wrapped himself in white cloth, loaded his body with grenades, and crawled straight into machine gun fire, alone. When he reached the top of that hill, 3 gun crews would be destroyed, and Dunham would still refuse to leave the fight. By mid-afternoon on January 8, 1945, an American infantry platoon lay trapped at the base of Hill 616 near Kaysersberg, France. Snow reached their knees. German machine gun fire tore through the frozen air above them, locking every man flat against the ground. Technical Sergeant Russell Dunham, just 24 years old and already hardened by 3 campaigns, watched his platoon bleed with no safe way out. 3 MG-42 machine guns, hidden inside reinforced timber positions, dominated the slope ahead, each capable of firing over 1,200 rounds per minute. Artillery bursts closed in from the rear. Retreat meant slaughter. Staying put meant annihilation. The only path left was straight up a 40-degree hillside, where 11 men had already died that week and the snow itself had turned red. Every man in company, I understood the numbers, and they were brutal. During the fighting in the Vosges Mountains, the 3rd Infantry Division had been losing men faster than any other American unit in Europe. The Germans controlled the high ground. They had unobstructed fields of fire, prepared positions, and more than enough ammunition. Dunham glanced back. His platoon lay 35 yards behind him, flattened into the snow, unable to advance or withdraw. Staying down meant German artillery would soon walk shells directly onto their position. Pulling back meant crossing open ground under machine gun fire. There was no safe option. The temperature hovered at 12 degrees Fahrenheit, snow piled deep and blindingly white. Dunham's olive-drab uniform stood out like a target. Every attempt to move had already been spotted and crushed. The hill belonged to the enemy. So Dunham crawled rearward, found a white mattress cover, tore it open, and began turning himself into camouflage. Dunham began loading with methodical speed. 12 30-round carbine magazines disappeared into every pocket, strap, and loop he could reach. Mark II fragmentation grenades lined his belt, hung from his suspenders, and filled the front of his field jacket until metal pressed against metal. When he finally rose, he was carrying over 70 pounds of ammunition and explosives stacked on top of his rifle. His platoon sergeant watched him in silence. Dunham offered no explanation. He dropped back into the snow and started forward. The first 75 yards took nearly 18 minutes. He moved only when German fire shifted elsewhere, freezing flat whenever the MG-42s swept back across his path. Melted snow soaked through the white cover. His fingers went numb. The sling bit into his shoulder under the crushing weight. By the time he reached the 75-yard mark, he was less than 10 yards from the first machine gun position, a log-reinforced bunker tied into overlapping fields of fire. 3 Germans manned the gun, one feeding ammunition, one firing, one scanning the slope below. Dunham rose suddenly from the snow and lunged forward. The movement was instant death if spotted, and it was. German eyes snapped toward him as the machine gun swung hard in his direction. At barely 6 yards, the MG-42 opened fire. Rounds ripped through the white covering around his body. A rifle shot followed, tearing across his back and carving a 10-inch gash from shoulder blade toward his spine. The force spun him completely around and hurled him 15 yards down the slope. He hit the snow face first. Blood flooded the wound, soaking through the cloth and turning it bright red against the white ground. The pain was overwhelming, every breath pulling the injury wider. He lay still, 5 seconds that felt like forever. Then a German grenade landed 2 feet from his head. Dunham lashed out with his boot, kicking it away just before it detonated. The grenade detonated about 5 yards downhill, the blast throwing snow and debris around him and lifting Dunham off the ground. Bloodied but unbroken, he hauled himself back to his feet and surged uphill, firing as he moved. His M1 carbine still held 28 rounds. The German machine gun swung toward him, but Dunham had already closed the angle inside the weapon's minimum traverse. At just 4 yards, he unleashed a 3-round burst into the gunner's chest. The assistant gunner reached for his rifle. 2 shots ended him. The third man, feeding ammunition, threw his hands up, screaming in German. Dunham's carbine was empty, 30 rounds gone in 18 seconds. He didn't pause. Grabbing the German by the collar of his fallen coat, he dragged him out of the bunker and shoved him down the slope toward American lines. The man stumbled through the snow, half running, half falling, as Dunham pressed forward. Dunham's platoon would later interrogate the first prisoner, but there was no time to celebrate. Blood streamed steadily down his back. The bullet had ripped through muscle and tissue, missing his spine by less than 2 inches. Every movement tore the wound wider. His white mattress cover was soaked from shoulders to waist. Against the snow, he looked like a crimson flag. Ahead, the second MG-42 nest sat 50 yards uphill and to the right. The Germans had seen him take out the first bunker and had adjusted their fire to cover every approach. Dunham reloaded a fresh 30-round carbine magazine, 11 left, 10 grenades, and began crawling forward. At 40 yards, the enemy opened fire, the bullets snapping through the snow toward him. Bullets snapped past his head, sending geysers of snow erupting around his boots. Dunham dropped low and crawled forward. Pain from the gash in his back was so intense that every few yards he had to pause just to stay conscious. Blood pooled inside his uniform, and his hands shook from a deadly mix of cold and blood loss. But he didn't stop. At 25 yards from the second bunker, he pushed up to one knee, yanked 2 Mark II grenades from his belt, pulled the pins, counted 2 seconds, and launched them in a high arc toward the timber structure. A German screamed as the explosives landed. Both grenades detonated almost simultaneously, ripping apart logs and equipment. The machine gun went silent. Smoke poured from the shattered bunker, and bodies tumbled into the snow. 3 men, gone. Dunham didn't hesitate. Carbine raised, he pressed forward. Dunham shifted his focus downhill to the German riflemen dug into foxholes around the first machine gun. 6 soldiers scrambled out, trying to escape the advancing Americans. From just 15 yards, Dunham opened fire, cycling through another full magazine, striking anything that moved. 3 went down. The others broke and fled uphill, away from the American advance. He let them go. His attention was now fixed on a single remaining target. The third MG-42 sat 65 yards up the slope, the highest and most commanding position, its field of fire covering the entire advance. The Germans inside had been watching for 12 minutes. They knew exactly where Dunham was, that he was wounded, and that his once white coat now blazed blood red against the snow from 200 yards away. And they had him zeroed in. Dunham stared up the hill. The MG-42 barrel swung directly toward him. Rifle grenades began detonating in the snow just 10 yards away, the concussions yanking him sideways. He slammed into the ground as machine gun fire shredded the air where he had been standing moments before. Out in the open, with no cover, Dunham's blood trail marked the snow like a crimson highway. The Germans on the hill were locked on, and they weren't about to miss again. Slowly, he crawled forward. The third machine gun nest loomed 40 yards ahead and 30 feet higher, reinforced with sandbags and positioned to dominate the southern approach to Hill 616. Every few seconds, the MG-42 spat deadly bursts, the bullets skimming the snow, searching for him. Dunham moved only in the fleeting gaps. 5 yards. Stop. Wait for the sweep. Then 3 more yards. The snow burned his hands. The wound in his back had shifted from sharp agony to a deep, grinding ache radiating through his entire torso. Blood loss blurred his vision at the edges, yet he still had 9 magazines and 8 grenades. 40 yards from the third bunker, a rifle grenade exploded 6 yards to his left, hurling snow and frozen earth across his back. The shrapnel struck like a horse's kick. He couldn't tell if he'd been hit again. Everything hurt. Still, he crawled. 30 yards, 25. The MG fire grew more precise. The Germans could see him clearly now, even against the snow. His blood-soaked mattress cover left a red trail pointing straight to him like an arrow. 20 yards, 15. Dunham paused, drawing his legs under him. Timing was everything. The MG-42 spat bursts of 8 to 12 rounds, pausing 2 to 3 seconds as the gunner recalibrated. Dunham counted. Burst 1, 2, 3, and lunged to his feet, staggering forward. The Germans spotted him instantly. The MG-42 swung toward him, but Dunham was already in motion, pulling grenades from his belt. 2 Mark II grenades were in his hands, pins pulled. At just 10 yards, he hurled them both. The first struck the sandbags and bounced inside the bunker. The second flew through the narrow firing slit. Dunham dove flat as both grenades detonated. The explosion was massive. Sandbags tore apart, timber cracked and splintered, and the machine gun barrel twisted off its mount. Pushing himself up, Dunham advanced, carbine raised, scanning the smoke-filled wreckage. All 3 defenders lay down, motionless. One man twitched, reaching for his rifle. Dunham fired once more. Silence fell. Then, boots crunched sharply in the snow behind him. He spun. A German rifleman had emerged from a support foxhole, barely 20 feet away. The German raised his carabiner 98 and fired point-blank. The bullet missed Dunham's head by inches. He fired back. The first shot struck the man in the throat. The second hit center mass. The German crumpled backward into the snow, motionless. Dunham stood atop the hill, gasping for air. His carbine was empty again. 175 rounds fired, 11 grenades thrown. 3 machine gun nests destroyed. 9 enemy soldiers killed, 7 wounded, and 2 captured. His platoon was finally free from the deadly pin. Below, Company I advanced up the slope. His brother Ralph moved with the 2nd Squad. The Germans were retreating to secondary positions along the ridge. The assault was working. The advance was gaining momentum. By nightfall, Hill 616 would be in American hands. Dunham glanced down at his uniform. The white mattress cover was now completely saturated with blood from neck to knees. Every breath pulled painfully at the gash in his back. The agony was so intense that thinking clearly was nearly impossible. His hands shook uncontrollably from shock and blood loss. But he had done it. 120 soldiers from Company I, pinned in the valley below, now had a chance. Without his assault, artillery would have cut them down within the hour. Now they were moving. Now they were fighting. Now they had hope. Dunham sank into the snow, waiting for medics. He didn't believe he was going to die. Not today. 8 minutes later, the medics arrived, cutting away the blood-soaked cover and opening his field jacket to assess the wound. The bullet had torn a 10-inch gash, 2 inches deep, running from his left shoulder blade toward his spine. Muscle and bone were visible to the medics. They packed the wound with sulfa powder and wrapped it tightly with compression bandages, then administered a shot of morphine and prepared him for evacuation. Dunham refused to leave. With his empty carbine in hand, he walked back down the hill alongside Company I. By the time they reached the battalion aid station at 1800 hours, he had lost so much blood that he collapsed at the entrance. The battalion surgeon examined him immediately, ordering evacuation to the rear for surgery. The wound required stitches, thorough debridement, and at least 2 weeks of recovery before he could return to combat. Dunham spent 4 days at the division clearing station. Surgeons meticulously cleaned the wound and closed it with 43 stitches. They told him the bullet had missed his spinal cord by less than 2 inches, a hair's breadth from paralysis. Had the gash been just an inch deeper, it would have severed his spine completely. Miraculously, the wound was clean. No major nerve damage, no infection. He would survive. On January 13th, 5 days after the assault on Hill 616, Dunham was released to a rest area 20 miles behind the front lines. The 3rd Infantry Division had been engaged continuously since landing in southern France that August, grinding forward through battle after battle. The division had clawed its way through the Vosges Mountains, fought fiercely through Strasbourg, and was now locked in Operation Nordwind, Germany's final major offensive on the Western Front. Casualties had been staggering. In December alone, the division lost 863 men killed and 3,200 wounded. Every rifle company was operating at roughly 60% strength. The replacement pipeline couldn't keep pace. Soldiers were being pushed back into the line before their wounds had fully healed. There simply weren't enough men to hold the front. Dunham's own injury still seeped through the bandages. The stitches tore with every movement. Doctors had warned him he needed 3 more weeks of recovery before he could return to duty. But on January 18th, just 10 days after Hill 616, Dunham walked into the Company I command post and reported for duty. His wound hadn't healed. Stitches were still in, but the 2nd platoon was down to 18 men, and every rifle counted. The company commander scanned Dunham's medical file, then looked at him, and without hesitation, sent him back to his squad. They were moving north toward Holzwar, a small town 15 miles from the German border. Intelligence reported heavy German armor in the area. Panzer units from the 19th Army were carrying out spoiling attacks to slow the American advance. Company I would hold the southern defensive perimeter of the town. Dunham rejoined his platoon on January 20th, ready to fight again. His brother Ralph remained with the 2nd Squad, still carrying the Browning automatic rifle he'd wielded since North Africa. They didn't speak of Hill 616, there was nothing to say. Every soldier in the company already knew the story. General Patch had personally visited the battalion on January 16th to meet Dunham, shaking his hand and telling him his actions had saved 120 men from certain artillery death. But that was Hill 616. This was Holzwar, a different fight, with entirely new stakes. The 3rd Infantry Division was exhausted, under strength, facing German armor with limited anti-tank support. Every position was temporary. Every defensive line hung by a thread. And on the morning of January 22, 1945, the 2nd Platoon would find themselves surrounded by German tanks, with nowhere to run. Dunham's war was about to get far more dangerous. At 0600 on January 22, 1945, German tanks appeared on 3 sides of Company I's position in Holtz. Dunham counted 7 Panther tanks and 3 Tiger Eyes moving through the morning fog, their engines growling like rolling thunder across the frozen fields. The 3rd Infantry Division had no armor support in this sector, no tank destroyers, no artillery within range. 2nd Platoon had only 2 bazooka teams and a total of 14 rockets between them. The German assault came from 19th Army Armored Reserves, held back during Operation Nordwind and now unleashed to cut off the American salient pushing toward the Rhine. The Panthers advanced from the west in a staggered line across open farmland, every movement exposing them to the Americans below. The Tiger tanks advanced from the south, their 88mm guns already trained on any movement below. Company I's position was indefensible. They were dug into a cluster of farm buildings on the southern edge of Holtz Sphere. No cover, no concealment, no way to stop 7-ton tanks with 8-inch frontal armor. The bazooka teams fired their rockets at maximum range. 2 hit, but both bounced harmlessly off the Panthers' glassy plates. The Germans didn't even slow. By 0630, the company commander gave the order to surrender. White flags rose from 3 buildings. The German tanks halted, and infantry moved forward to round up the prisoners. 147 men from Company I walked out with their hands in the air, defeated but alive. The Germans disarmed the men, searched them, and formed them into columns for transport to peak camps in the rear. But Dunham didn't surrender. While the Germans were processing prisoners, he slipped out the back of the farmhouse and sprinted west through a line of bare trees toward a cluster of outbuildings 200 yards away. His back wound had reopened overnight, blood seeping through the bandages beneath his uniform, but he refused to spend the rest of the war in a prison camp. Reaching the outbuildings unnoticed, he surveyed 3 structures: a small barn, a tool shed, and a stone storage building with a wooden door hanging on its hinges. He checked the barn first. Empty, save for rotting hay. The shed was empty, cluttered only with broken farm equipment. But the stone storage building held something more: barrels. 6 wooden barrels lined the far wall, each about 4 feet tall and 3 feet wide. Dunham lifted the lid of the first barrel: frozen potatoes. The second barrel was empty. The third, sauerkraut. The fermented cabbage filled the barrel nearly to the top, and the smell hit him like a physical blow, acidic, overpowering, and burning his eyes. Glancing back toward the farmhouse, he saw German soldiers moving through the yard, shouting and crunching through the frozen ground. They'd be there in minutes. Without hesitation, Dunham clambered into the sauerkraut barrel. The cabbage was cold, slimy, and packed tight, forcing him down chest first, then neck deep, before he pulled the wooden lid over his head. The brine soaked through his uniform, stinging the fresh wound on his back. The sting of the brine was excruciating, like acid searing raw flesh. Dunham bit down on his tongue to stop himself from screaming. He could hear the Germans entering the storage building, boots clanging against stone floors, voices shouting rapidly in German, barrels being kicked and lids lifted. Every container was inspected. Dunham pressed himself deeper into the sauerkraut, barely daring to breathe. The lid stayed firmly closed above him. After a tense few minutes, the Germans moved on, checking other barrels, then left. Dunham stayed perfectly still, barely breathing, as the temperature plummeted and night approached. For 13 hours, he remained trapped in the barrel. By sunset, the freezing brine had turned to slush, coating his body, and he could no longer feel his hands or feet. The wound in his back had gone numb, a mix of cold and the acidic burn from the fermented cabbage. Every hour, he shifted slightly, trying to keep blood flowing, even though each movement drenched the gash in brine again. At 0700 on January 23rd, the sun began to rise. Thin strips of light filtered through cracks in the barrel lid. Dunham listened intently. No voices, no engines, no boots on the frozen ground. The Germans had moved on. Waiting another 30 minutes to be sure, he slowly lifted the lid and climbed out. His uniform was soaked in brine and frozen stiff, his fingers white from frostbite. The bandages had dissolved, leaving the wound fully exposed. He smelled sauerkraut from 10 feet away, but he was alive, and he was free. Moving to the storage building's doorway, he peered out. The farmyard was deserted. The German tanks had retreated under the cover of night. Company I's position lay abandoned, scattered with equipment the Germans hadn't even bothered to collect. Dunham's eyes fell on American helmets and rifles strewn in the dirt. He knew he had to move, get back to the American lines before the enemy returned. But first, the agony of 13 hours trapped in a barrel forced him to relieve himself. He stepped out carefully, hugging the side of the barn. Then, 2 German soldiers appeared, walking around the opposite corner, speaking in low, hurried German. They spotted him immediately, raising their rifles and shouting. Dunham raised his hands, unarmed, his carbine still hidden in the sauerkraut barrel. He was soaked, freezing, and dripping with brine, but he was ready for what came next. The Germans advanced cautiously, unaware of the storm about to hit them. The first German soldier kept his rifle trained squarely on Dunham, while the second stepped forward to frisk him. Hands moved over his uniform, pockets checked, until a pack of Lucky Strike cigarettes appeared in Dunham's left breast pocket. The soldier held it up, and immediately, the second man reached for it, claiming it as his share. A heated argument broke out. Voices rose, gestures flew, and for 30 tense seconds, they debated the cigarettes. In that distraction, they missed everything else. No right side check, no notice of the Colt M1911 tucked in Dunham's leather shoulder holster. Finally, they agreed to split the pack and waved him along. Dunham walked past, the unarmed facade hiding deadly firepower beneath his jacket. Dunham was marched to the main road, where a German Kübelwagen idled, engine growling softly, its driver behind the wheel. The two soldiers shoved him into the back seat, squeezing in on either side. He sat rigid, hands on his knees, silent, every nerve alert. The driver shifted gears, and the vehicle rolled east, cutting through frozen fields and empty villages. 40 minutes passed in tense quiet, the only sounds the crunch of tires on frost and distant crows. At 1,100 hours, the Kübelwagen pulled off the main road, stopping before a stone chateau turned German command post. The driver barked orders in German, climbed out, and disappeared inside, leaving the engine idling and Dunham trapped between his captors. The guard on Dunham's left casually lit a cigarette, eyes fixed on the frozen fields outside. The one on the right leaned back, eyes closed, drifting in momentary boredom. Neither noticed Dunham moving. Slowly, deliberately, he slid his Colt from the shoulder holster, aimed to his right, and fired. The first guard's head snapped back. The other started to turn. 2 precise shots to the chest stopped him instantly. Dunham kicked open the Kübelwagen door, vaulted out, and sprinted toward the tree line 300 yards north. Behind him, frantic shouts echoed from the chateau, followed by a burst of gunfire. Bullets snapped past his head, kicking up chunks of frozen earth. He didn't glance back. Branches tore at his face as he plunged into the tree line, sprinting through bare limbs and frost-hardened underbrush. Every step a desperate race for freedom. The German gunfire faded after 30 seconds, leaving an eerie silence across the snow-covered fields. They weren't chasing him. Prisoners needed guarding, and the command post required attention. But Dunham was alone, deep in enemy territory, armed with only a Colt and 4 rounds. His back wound had ripped open again during the sprint, blood seeping through his soaked uniform. Frostbite had already stolen feeling from his feet after 13 hours in the sauerkraut barrel. The thermometer read 9 degrees Fahrenheit, and the wind cut through him like knives. 30 miles behind enemy lines, with no map, no compass, no food, he had only one option: west. West toward the front. West toward the distant rumble of artillery. West toward anything that wasn't German. He moved cautiously, slipping through tree lines, ducking into frozen ditches, avoiding open roads and small villages. Every step a delicate balance between survival and exposure. Every 20 minutes, Dunham had to stop and force his frozen feet to move. Each step a battle against the ice locking his joints. His back throbbed relentlessly, a grinding ache radiating through his torso with every motion. As night fell, he discovered the wreckage of a barn and crawled into its shattered shell. A fire was impossible. The Germans patrolled the area relentlessly. He pulled handfuls of dried hay over himself for insulation and tried to rest. The temperature plunged to 3 degrees Fahrenheit. The damp uniform, still soaked with sauerkraut brine, had frozen solid against his skin. He shivered uncontrollably. His teeth snapped together, cutting his tongue. On the second day, he pressed westward across frozen fields and deserted roads. Twice, he froze as German vehicles passed, hiding in the shadows until they moved on. His feet had gone from numb to searing agony. That night, when he removed his boots, he recoiled. The tips of his toes had turned black, a grim warning of frostbite's unforgiving grip. Dunham's toes were blackened, 2nd-degree frostbite, maybe worse, but he forced his boots back on and kept moving. Stopping wasn't an option. Stillness meant death in the merciless cold. On the 3rd day, January 25th, The distant rumble of American artillery reached his ears, a steady, pounding rhythm of 155mm howitzers firing in unison from the west. He followed the sound like a lifeline. By mid-afternoon, thin columns of smoke rose above the tree line, signs of Allied positions. At 1,600 hours, he broke through a stand of trees and saw the Ill River glinting in the pale winter sun. A steel bridge spanned the icy water, and on the far side, American engineers were reinforcing it with timber supports. Dunham started toward them, but as he approached, the engineers saw him. Rifle snapped up, every movement frozen in the tense moment between survival and danger. Dunham stumbled forward, clad in a German-issued field jacket he'd taken from a destroyed supply truck the day before. He looked like the enemy. He raised his hands high, shouting that he was American. His voice cracked across the freezing air as he called out his name, rank, and unit. The engineers kept their rifles trained on him, tense and uncertain. Then, one lowered his weapon and waved him forward. Dunham crossed the steel bridge, every step agony, his feet mangled, his back wound raw and infected, 20 pounds lighter from 3 days of relentless struggle. At the far end, he collapsed. A medic appeared, Corporal Henderson from the battalion aid station. Henderson's eyes widened at Dunham's condition. Without hesitation, he called for a stretcher. Dunham was lifted onto a truck and rushed to the division clearing station, where surgeons labored for 6 grueling hours to save his feet from amputation. They cleaned the infected wound on Dunham's back and started him on sulfa drugs to fight the infection. 3 days later, while he lay in a hospital bed, a lieutenant from division headquarters entered the ward with a solemn expression. He told Dunham that his company commander had recommended him for the Distinguished Service Cross, but the regimental commander had upgraded it, and the division commander had approved it. Technical Sergeant Russell Dunham would receive the Medal of Honor for his extraordinary actions on Hill 616. On April 23, 1945, Dunham stood at attention in Zeppelin Stadium in Nuremberg, Germany. Once the site of Nazi rallies, the stadium was now scarred concrete and rubble, occupied by American forces. Lieutenant General Alexander Patch, commander of the 7th Army, held the Medal of Honor in his hand, preparing to place it around Dunham's neck. Patch read the citation aloud, each word heavy with the weight of Dunham's actions. The crawl up Hill 616, the 3 machine gun nests, the 10-inch wound across his back, the German grenade kicked aside, 9 enemies killed, 7 wounded, 2 captured, 175 rounds of carbine ammunition fired, 11 grenades expended, and 120 American soldiers saved from certain death. Then Patch placed the Medal of Honor around Dunham's neck and added words not in the official citation. He said that in 30 years of military service, he had never seen a single soldier turn the tide of an entire engagement through sheer courage and relentless determination. Russell Dunham fought like 10 men today, he said. Every man who walked off Hill 616 alive owes his life to one sergeant, a mattress cover, and a dozen grenades. Dunham said nothing. He simply stood, silent, letting the moment speak for him. His brother Ralph stood among the audience, alongside 40 men from Company I who had survived the Alsace campaign. The war in Europe would end in just 2 weeks. The 3rd Infantry Division had fought across North Africa, Sicily, Italy, France, and Germany, suffering 11,300 casualties along the way. They had earned 36 Medals of Honor, more than any other division in the conflict. Yet on this day in Nuremberg, only Russell Dunham stood on the platform. The medics had saved his feet. The infection in his back wound had cleared after 3 weeks of sulfa treatment, and the stitches were gone. The wound had healed into a 10-inch scar along his spine, and he would carry fragments of shrapnel in his back for the rest of his life, too deep to remove without risking paralysis. After the Medal of Honor ceremony, Russell Dunham returned to the United States. He was just 25 years old. He had enlisted in August 1940 alongside his brother Ralph. drawn by the $30 monthly pay during the hardships of the Depression. He had survived 4 amphibious landings, 7 major campaigns, and 2 narrow escapes from German captivity. He had personally killed at least 19 confirmed enemy soldiers and carried the scars of 3 wounds. Back home in Illinois, he married Mary and dedicated 32 years to the Veterans Administration in St. Louis, helping fellow veterans navigate claims, medical care, and benefits. He attended Medal of Honor gatherings and 3rd Infantry Division reunions, but rarely spoke of the war. And when someone asked, he always said the same thing. He always said he was just doing his job. Any man in Company I, he insisted, would have done the same. Russell Dunham passed away peacefully in his sleep on April 6, 2009, at his home in Godfrey, Illinois. He was 89. His brother Ralph had died a decade earlier, and most of the men from Company I were gone. The war that had defined their youth had become distant history for most Americans. Yet the Medal of Honor remained. The official record endured, and 120 men who should have died on Hill 616 in January 1945 had lived because of one man's courage. If this story moved you even a fraction of how it moved us, hit that like button. Every like you give helps YouTube share this story with more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Every day, we're bringing forgotten stories out of dusty archives. Stories of sergeants who saved lives with nothing but courage, mattress covers, and grenades. Real people, real heroism. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you're watching from. Are you in the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia? Our community spans the globe. You're not just a viewer, you're helping keep these memories alive. Share your location. Tell us if someone in your family served. Let us know you're here. Thank you for watching. Thank you for making sure Russell Dunham and men like him are never forgotten. Your support makes sure their courage lives on.